Well, another runway excursion by a Honda jet. This one occurred yesterday, the 7th of April, November 826 Echo. 5 folks were successfully evacuated out of the aircraft after it overran the runway at Oregon's North Bend Airport and ended up 100 feet off the end of the runway here in Coos Bay. Let's check it out. Starting with the Aviation Safety Network, we see this accident occurred on Monday, the 7th of April. It was like 6:15 in the morning at North Bend, Southwest Oregon Regional Airport. And the wind and the weather was, it looks like wet runways. Winds 190 at 8 or 160 at 5. Light rain in the area. The Honda jet with 5 folks on board was coming up from St. George, Utah. And if we zoom in on the final approach portion, it looks like a stabilized approach on the glide slope, and the ground speeds towards the end here are from 146 knots down to about 133 knots on the approach, and then dropping off to about 122 knots. And if we look at this KML data on Google Earth, it looks to be a nice smooth ILS approach into runway 05. Runway 05 here at North Bend is 5,980 feet, nearly 6,000 feet long with this overrun, including this overrun over here. But let's take a closer look at those speeds. The crew was landing on runway 05. The winds were out of the south at 8 knots, and that would have given the crew about a 6-knot tailwind on a wet runway. Now, I can't find a quick reference to a typical VREF speed for the Honda jet other than this article that we've quoted from before in AOPA magazine. It's showing a VREF something on the order of about 112 knots. Plus the tailwind, that ground speed appears pretty fast off the KML or off of the ADS-B data. And this appears to be a security camera of the actual overrun, pre-dawn darkness. Here's the Honda jet here, not getting slowed down in time before going off of the end of the runway right there. The Honda jet is beginning to show a trend of runway overruns or excursions. And a couple of things about the design is that on the wings of the Honda jet, there's no ground spoilers built into the wings of the jet to help spoil the lift and get the weight on the wheels to make your brakes more effective, like is more commonly found in other designs. The Honda jet does have a speed brake, and I understand this latest design automatically deploys the speed brake in the event of a rejected takeoff under some landings, but it's a clamshell, old school clamshell style speed brake located back here on the tail of the aircraft. And when deployed, it looks like this, with the aircraft going in the forward direction this way, hydraulically actuated. The brakes on the Honda jet are actuated by a single hydraulic system providing 3,000 psi, and they have a normal brake actuation here and an emergency accumulator capability located over here. The hydraulics also power the nose wheel steering and the speed brake and the raising and lowering of the landing gear. The wheels and brakes on the Honda jet are a single 17.5-inch wheel with anti-skid brakes. The nose wheel steering, powered by the same hydraulic system, is free castering when you come into land, so that in the event of a crosswind, you've got your crosswind control inputs in there so that the rudder input that you're putting in for the crosswind is not directly translated to the nose gear until about 2 seconds after the weight of the nose landing gear, until the weight of the aircraft is on the nose landing gear, then your rudder input, then you have nose wheel steering. But according to some of these pilot reports, it sounds like this nose wheel steering can get a little squirrely on the Honda jet. And you do have the option to turn the nose wheel steering off. And a lot of these reports were covered in an article here in Aviation Week back on the 28th of February of this year. And after doing a little research here on the ASRS Aviation Safety and Reporting System database, 8 of the 15 reports had to do something with the ability to get the aircraft stopped. So these reports go back in time and they're de-identified, made anonymous reports. Here's the ASRS report on the one about the crosswind. I knew the winds were gusty as this jet has troubles in crosswind. I did a go-around as the runway was not clear. I was at VREF plus 10 and now very low on fuel, light on passengers as well. Upon touchdown, I applied aileron into the wind and applied the brakes. No braking action was observed and the aircraft drifted off the left side of the runway. No injuries. Here's another one in 2024 with a loss of hydraulic pressure. Aircraft landed, normal brake steering inputs were felt until the brake accumulator completely drained. That's the purpose of the accumulator brake pressure, is to give you some braking pressure if you lose all of that hydraulic power from the hydraulic system, the one and only hydraulic system on the Honda jet. As I lost brake pressure and steering pressure, I extended the emergency brake to completely stop the aircraft. The very next report, it sounds like this crew is trying to do a max effort landing into a 3,000-foot runway, kind of the shortest runway you'd want to attempt in a Honda jet. So they did all their calculations, figured they could make it. The second in command entered the flare, decrabbed the aircraft just as expected. Touchdown was smooth, good deceleration, just slightly right of the center line. About 1,000 feet from the threshold, the PIC announced and deployed the speed brake for the second in command. The aircraft initially tracked straight, just right of the center line. The second in command applied braking. After about 3 seconds, the aircraft developed a strong drift to the right. The PIC waited for a correction, then announced and took the controls of the aircraft, approached the side of the runway. The SIC released and announced, "You have the controls," and the PIC applied initial and increasing control and brake input to arrest the drift. However, the aircraft response to PIC input was delayed, leading to more control and brake input. A swerve then developed to the left. The PIC released some of the brake and attempted to control with rudder and nose wheel steering. Man, you got to be careful with that nose wheel steering and at the higher speeds. Pilot induced a PIO developed with a trajectory towards the left side of the runway, and the PIC then applied maximum braking, and the aircraft began to skid to the right. The aircraft came to a stop on the edge of the runway, past the intersection of Yankee and the runway. The next report is another hydraulic system failure, but it looks like they were able to use the brake accumulator to get the aircraft stopped. Here's a report where they were landing on a wet runway, similar to the accident there in Coos Bay. Based on the reported weather, I was expecting light rain, a potentially damp runway on arrival. Approach and landing were normal in all respects. When I depressed the brakes, I did not experience any braking action. I continued to keep the pressure applied to the brakes as I continued down the runway. I kept the pressure on the brake pedals approaching the end of the runway. I increased the amount of pressure to the brake pedals, but still did not experience any braking action. I did not experience any normal braking action at any point during the landing rollout and exited the far end of the runway. The Honda jet reported there was no braking action during rollout and the aircraft exited the far end of the runway. Now, this may be a case of a contaminated runway versus a wet runway. In this advisory circular put out by the FAA back in 2015, they get into the difference between a wet runway and a contaminated runway. And does the data for the Honda jet include data for a contaminated runway, or is it a no-go item for the Honda jet? Because a contaminated runway is where you can easily get into hydroplaning, whether it's dynamic, reverted rubber, or viscous hydroplaning. Things that will not allow you to stop worth a darn. In typical FAA parlance, a dry runway is a runway that's neither wet nor contaminated, and a wet runway is a runway that's neither dry nor contaminated. It's just wet. But a contaminated runway is when more than 25% of the runway surface is covered by frost, ice, or any depth of snow, slush, or water. And for water, they're looking at a depth greater than 1/8 of an inch. Now, here's a case where a crew definitely landed on a contaminated runway, and it gives us some insight as to how your landing distance is calculated on the Honda jet, and it's apparently done in the FMS prior to landing. And in this case, they programmed the FMS for the given runway landing and distance, but they selected wet runway conditions and added a 1.15% factor for the wet runway. Again, does it give you the ability to calculate for a contaminated runway, or is that just a no-go? After touchdown, speed brakes were extended and brakes were applied. Halfway down rolling on the runway, the captain said that this thing wasn't stopping, and it felt like he was sliding on ice. There was no friction between the main tires and the runway surface. He responded, "I have max braking," and the aircraft was hydroplaning. At about 1,500 feet prior to the runway ending, I said, "We're going into the grass area," and he responded, "Yeah, we're going straight for the grass area." And it came to a rest about 100 to 150 feet off into the grassy area. So back to the Aviation Week article written by Patrick Villette here. He asks some pretty hard questions of Honda. First off, he sees that the FAA has done the FAA recommends the thing that they always recommend, use a safety management system process to help identify these hazards and prevent future excursions. But Pat asked Honda Aircraft directly, based on all these reports, have they done anything to change the design of the aircraft? And Honda said that they are continuously improving the experience. Safety our highest priority. Every model of Honda Jet engineered to the highest and exacting standards. It's our practice to assist the NTSB investigations where the Honda Jet's involved, and a careful review of any recommendations that are made. Now, I don't know if the NTSB's come up with any recommendations to the Honda Jet design, but Pat asks the good question here. We got this recurring pattern of fundamental design. Do we have a fundamental design problem with the Honda Jet, and should it be addressed? And here we yet have another Honda Jet, this time splashed into the Coos Bay, Oregon. I think there's more to it than just pilot error in the design of the braking system of the Honda Jet. Thank you so much for your support of this channel, especially the folks over on Patreon that make this content possible. See you here.